Hello and welcome to 5 Questions, 5 Artists. My name is Liz Andrews, and I am the co-curator of Black American Portraits and the executive director of the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art, broadcasting from Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia today. Welcome. 5 Questions, 5 Artists is presented by LACMA in conjunction with Black American Portraits, an exhibition that covers 200 years of portraiture and reframes the history of portraiture to center Black subjects, sitters, and spaces. And so this event series asks 5 artists from the exhibition questions about their practice and the idea of representing legacy through portraiture. I'm honored to be in conversation with the artist Elizabeth Colomba today. And so I'll bring her up to the virtual stage now. And to give you all a sense of the greatness we are here with today, from Martinique descent, born and raised in France, Elizabeth Colomba is a representational artist living and working in New York City. After receiving her degree in applied arts in Paris, she continued her studies while developing her own style. Upon graduating from college, she moved to Los Angeles, which is key to the story, to pursue painting while working on feature films. Her aesthetic draws from inspiration from old masters and refers to mythological, allegorical, and historical narratives mixed with her cinematic skills. Depicting stories featuring Black characters, Elizabeth Colomba generates space for her subjects to inhabit the rewriting of history. So it is such an honor to be here with you today. Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor for me to be here as well. I'm very excited. I'm excited to be in conversation with you. We go back.
So yes, we do. I know. Quite a bit. All the way to New York City a while ago.
Don't say that. You don't need to say a while ago.
We'll just say we go back. We'll just say that. And that I've been admiring your work for so long, and just there's something so special and powerful about it. And it wasn't actually until this exhibition that I'd seen your portrait of Biddy Mason, which we'll get to later, but now I am just in love, and I think it's such an incredible rendering. So, all right, we'll jump right in, and I think we can probably pull up the pictures because I know you've picked out some things to illustrate what we'll be talking about. And I'll ask you the first question. Could you tell us about your choice of medium and materials, or perhaps in your case, symbols for this portrait of Biddy Mason? Yes. Were there any surprises that happened in the planning process or final work because of the materials or symbols?
Well, first I would like to tell a bit of a story of Biddy Mason for people who might not know her, right? I came across Biddy Mason when I was living in Los Angeles. And at that time, there was not a lot of information about her, but enough for me to have an idea of her and start to be not only fascinated by her spirit, but also her journey. So Biddy Mason, I'm going to try to sum up her story in 10 minutes. Obviously, it will not do her justice, but we have the time to be time conscious. So she was born in Georgia in 1818 and in bondage. And she had many skills. She discovered to be a midwife. She knew about medicinal herbs that was, tradition passed from inheritance from, Caribbeans, African inheritance. And she was applying it in every day. She was key to the household she was in. And I think around late 1840s, beginning of 1850s, her enslaver decided to move to the West and go to Utah because he was of Mormon faith and he wanted to be established there. So they had to cross the States by carriage, and she was forced to walk behind. And at the time, she already had 3 kids. We're not sure who the father was of the 3 kids, but we're almost certain that one of them at least was from her enslaver. So during that journey, she took care of everybody as usual and her own needs and her own kids. When she arrived to Utah, they stayed there for a while and they pushed to California. I don't remember the reason why, but they did push. And she knew people along the way, and she was a very smart lady. And she knew that when she landed in California, California was a free state, and if she was staying there for 2 years, she was free. So she stayed put. And I'm not saying on the dot, but quite quickly she made her master understand that she was going to stay in California. He wanted to convince everybody that they would go back to Texas and promise them freedom. Obviously, they're not stupid. So they stayed in California. She sued him. She won. And after that win, she established a bit of a modest business that consisted in healing people with her knowledge of herbs, still being a midwife. And she managed to save money to buy a little bit of land in Los Angeles, managed throughout the years to build what is the equivalent of today's downtown LA, sold it back, and became a millionaire entrepreneur, and still gave back to her community, was incredibly charitable, open. I think one of the first a Black church in California. And also, I think a children care, if I'm not mistaken, for Black kids. I mean, she was feeding people who could not be fed, didn't have. I mean, she was incredible. So I believe and she is an incredible inspiration. So that definitely drew me to her. So what I learned from doing that portrait and significance of symbolism in that painting. So I wanted to show her journey. So you have the map in the back that is the map of California at the time of in the 19th century. You can see it's almost as if she is in her office. It's obviously, I'm not sure that if that was her office, but I feel like with the status that she had towards the end of her life, that that would be the kind of office she could have. Something very humble, as she was a humble lady, and something still that reminds us of what she was doing. And the palette is also very muted because I felt it goes also with her being and her spirit. So, and hopefully, it captured her status and her essence, I would say. But yeah, there was nothing really that, there was no hurdle. The only hurdle is that I didn't have much information, visual information about her. I think you can see that I think there was only one photograph existing of her, which is her face, which I used as a reference to create that portrait. I didn't want to take the risk to do like a 3/4 or a profile because it was non-existent, and I really wanted to stay true to her features in that particular case.
Yes, I love the inclusion of the map, the mortar and pestle, kind of the apothecary, things that she would have as this midwife, medicine woman, healer, and also the fine dress. This is at the time she has literally moved from slavery to freedom and to wealth, to ownership. And so she's, beautifully dressed, and the gaze is really powerful.
Yeah, and she attained a level of power in her lifetime, and definitely I wanted to convey that stance in the portrait. And I go back again. You're talking about her clothing, but I still wanted. Of course, you understand that it's something that is more refined than what she used to wear, probably, but it's still something very frugal, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
because it definitely echoes her spirit and also her actions in her life.
Mm. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Let's go to the next question. And speaking of questions, I'll say to our virtual audience out there, feel free to use the Q&A function throughout this talk. And so I see there's one already here, two, in fact. And I'm not sure if you want to address these, but one is, in Biddy Mason, you show a mortar and pestle on her table. What are the other objects? And then someone asked, is there a reference to her posture in leaning on her hand?
Okay. Yeah. So the other, so you have also something that you can burn things into, almost like I don't know the name in English for it, but it's something you can burn herbs or make some sort of a potion. On the left side, you have this jar which will refer to something that she already concocted, and it's macerating, some sort of a magical potion. You have scale, which also is the idea of justice, but it's also a tool that she will have to weigh her herbs. But I also wanted to have the scale to refer to the scale of justice and how she basically won in her trial. So that's a direct reference to that. And also in the background, you see obviously the her reserve of herbs and carefully put together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and her position in the table. I think there's something about a resting power in that position. She's still strong, but she's relaxed, meaning she's arrived in the time of her life when she is not really. It's not so much in control of her life, but she is hopefully content. And I feel like having a position where you can lean on your own desk and be relaxed enough to look at the viewer without lowering your gaze, which is what you had to do as an enslaved person to anybody who come across you who was not who was not also in bondage. This is what you had to do. So I love the fact that she's looking at the viewer very comfortably and relaxed.
It's wonderful. Let's go to the next slide and next question. Mm-hmm. What is your relationship to or with the sitter, Biddy Mason? And what discussions or considerations do you have or did you make when thinking about how she would want to be represented?
Well, I mean, there's not really a relationship per se, but my relationship is that I'm a huge fan. I believe her story is inspirational. Her action are inspirational. The fact that she stayed humble, that she gave back, just really is an example of how you could be. And I mean, I hope I embody the way she would like to be represented, which is some sort of frugality in her surroundings, referring to her skills, because her skills led her to freedom. But also the idea that, I mean, she did get help along the way, but really what helped her is her own spirit, her own will, her tenacity, the fact that her patience. I mean, somebody telling you have to stay still in a state that's supposedly a free state, and they're telling you that you have to stay 2 years in bondage on top of that, and still have the patience to wait. And oh God, I think it's an incredible, it's incredible inspiration to me. So that my relationship is definitely somebody I would look up to.
Mm. I'll say that one person asked, was the model for this portrait a photograph or a painting? And we see here the only existing photograph of her that we know of. So that answers the question, but there are three different questions coming in from our audience about Vermeer. One, it's the same composition as several of his paintings. Were you inspired by him? It looks like Le Geographie. Is it inspired by that? With the window and the light streaming in, I thought of Vermeer. So a few people, apparently it's a hot topic. They want to know, were you inspired?
Absolutely. Well, a lot of my, you could see in the body of my work, I inspired by old masters, certainly by Vermeer, by his light and the way he treats space and shadow and light and how they converse with each other. So certainly, but I also chose that technique because it's old masters technique, and I wanted to use the same technical ability that they had to represent people at that time. I wanted that portrait to look as if someone at this time of her life realized how great she was and took the time to make a portrait of her. And by using the same kind of language, which is obviously a visual language, I hope to accomplish that a little bit, to look like this painting might not be done today, but that people were kind enough and open-minded enough at that time to understand her power and really made a painting and a portrait of her. It reminded me of, because I was reading, and maybe we'll be able to talk about that a bit later, but I'm working on a portrait of Harriet Jacobs. As I was reading her book, which is really an autobiography of her time in bondage, she was telling, as she was on the run, she was telling to a friend who also was at the time, a free Black woman, that they went into a studio and she showed her the portrait of a Black woman that was done there. And in her book, she said she was moved because she'd never seen a portrait of a Black person ever. And she was transfigured. I just thought it was, I think it moved me because it made me realize that it's important to see yourself represented in an area where you feel you're not allowed to enter. So I really wanted to give that for B.D. Mason.
I love that. We have a question here. The person says, how do you find merging a Black history with a medium that is traditionally connected to white wealth? And maybe we could even draw that out a little more to say, this is someone who was owned. Think of the word master in the context of slavery. That's someone who owns another human being. And this idea of the old master paintings, the mastery of the craft, and also the fact that portraiture, is a tool of power, of white wealth, as this person says. So I am interested how you reconcile those potentially conflicting identities or ideas.
I think it's reclaiming the power of what is painting and what the skill is. I do refer at old masters because that's what we know it about. But this skill should be actually applied to any kind of painter who is good enough to do that type of work. And talking of wealth, we can also use it to re-inject the wealth in the Black body and in Black representation. Again, just a reference to B.D. Mason, she was a wealthy woman. And the fact that I'm using that technique to reflect her in power, it only makes sense. And yes, it is, and at the time, it is white wealth, but the wealth also came from Black bodies. It was built thanks to Black bodies. They're the ones who were exploited, who exploited the soil, collected everything. They were the tool that made the wealth. So I think it's only logical and deserving to reuse that tool to empower Blackness.
Mm. Let's go to the next slide and next question. What do you think is the responsibility of the artist when it comes to representing a significant figure and their legacy?
Well, I think it changes of what your responsibility is depending on who you're painting. I think it's the best way is to combine, first of all, do an extended amount of research and to combine the idea of the sitter and also their life, almost like make a window into their journey. I mean, when you're thinking about, and probably it's going to be, I'm mixing maybe several questions there, but when you're thinking about representation of portrait, it was mostly almost the idea of propaganda. It's the idea of representing people unto their best selves. A bit like Instagram today, right? Is this show where everything is perfect and you only conveying, if you're talking about leaders, you convey the idea of power, definitely the idea of wealth, and you don't really have a window of who they are as people, because that was not the point. The idea they have, they are most deified, they're most close to the divine, and they cannot be humanized in that way. And I feel today it's a bit different where you want to see the humanity, even though you want to present this sitter or this figure as best as possible, as a good reflection of their own story, but you want to see the human side of it. And I think that's the responsibility of the artist today. I mean, we see here two examples. I'm going to talk quickly about it if I can. It's part of my historical series, and the one on the left is Laure, who is a model that was used in the Olympia of Manet, but also at the time in France, Paris, France. And she was used also as a different for different painters at the time in Impressionist paintings. And she was, I'm going to say discovered, but that may be the wrong term, but for lack of a better word, humanly. She was part of this show called Posing Modernity, where the curator, who is Denise Murrell, decided to shine a light on her. And what was interesting, that I have part of my historical series where I am interested in Black models into the painting, which I did one about Portrait of Madeleine, which was known before as Portrait of a Negress, where I did a painting of her. And at that time, I was interested in highlighting Laure, who in the Olympia is the one who presenting the flowers to the Olympia, who I think her name was Victorine, but I'm not sure. But I wanted her to be the center stage of her own story, because in the Olympia, she's always in the background, even though in the painting they occupied equal space. She is the one that you are put backwards, that you're not really paying attention. Of course, the fact that the main protagonist is without clothes obviously attracts the eye, right? But she's almost fading in the background. So I wanted her to be in the center of a painting and saying, like, gazing at us, looking at us as if we're walking in the street, passing her, and she's moving an umbrella, and she's, looking at us, like saying that, take a look at me. So that was important for me to, not only for her to occupy the space of this painting, but also have this very penetrating gaze, I would say. And the other one, the Sempre Liber, is actually a representation of Cicieretta Jones. Cicieretta Jones was a Black singer, I think late 19th century, 1890s, I would say. And she is the first Black African American woman who sang at Carnegie Hall. And one of her songs, one of the songs that was part of her act that night was La Traviata Sempre Libera, which means simply free. And I thought that was a good theme for her, and I wanted to represent her elated and happy and really own that moment of freedom. Because what was interesting at the time, she was a singer in her own right, obviously, and she was incredibly skilled, but they were calling her the Black Patti. And Patti was an Italian singer at the time who was also very renowned. But I thought it was very telling to say that she couldn't just exist by herself being Cicieretta Jones. She had to be someone they refer to and that they know and put the name Black in front of her. So, and it also reminds me of this other historical figure called the Chevalier Saint-Georges, where a lot of people mention as the Black Mozart because his music is very similar to Mozart, and he happened to be a Black man, so it's the Black Mozart. So it's that reduction of people and their skill and compare them to their contemporary white colleagues, I would say. So hopefully I embody both spirits and both idea and respect their legacy by doing that type of work.
And we have a question from the audience about the Lori on the left. They say, I love the dog and cat here. So she's, of course, center stage here. But is there a reason for those inclusions?
Absolutely. So I will start with the cat because it's a bit shorter. The cat is a direct reference to the Olympia. As if you do remember the paintings, there is a cat on the bed, which I'm sure on Manet is maybe charged sexually. On my side, it's just a direct reference to the painting of Manet to understand and to identify lore as lore. Because if you notice, there's a bunch of flowers. The man who's in the carriage is carrying flowers, which are also the same flowers that you have in Manet's painting. And she's wearing the same dress. And you don't see her because obviously it's smaller, but she has the same earrings that are in Manet's painting. So all that helps identify Laura as the model. And the dog. So the dog, there is something also interesting with that painting, if I may say so. It's the status of women at that time in 19th French century. And the woman on the right is the embodiment of a woman called Cora Pearl. Cora Pearl was a British woman who moved to France and became a courtesan. And she was quite famous in her time. And she has a particularity of dyeing her pets the same color of a dress. So here you have the dog, which is a pink dog. And she had pugs. So there's a pug right here. And she dyed the dog the same color of her dress. But it's also the idea that socially women occupied smaller spaces at that time in society. So you have Laure, who was a model, and in the back you see a woman with two kids, which could be a symbol of, they had to be a mother, they have to be a wife, but also the other job was to be a nanny, right? And you have Cora Pearl, and you could be a courtesan, which is a lovely word for, prostitute. So it's also, there is a different layer to this painting. It is a portrait of law, but it's also a comment on the society at the time.
Oh, wow. I'll bet the person who was asking about that dog and cat had no idea. Was Laura placed in a, I don't know how you say this, calle bota, like milieu on purpose? I don't know what that word is. Probably a French word, I don't know.
I'm not sure if I understand the question, to be honest with you, but
I think just the setting, more the street, the place, is that it sounds like you answered that with the kind of commentary on society.
Yeah, but I will add something else because I'm not afraid of anything. I'll add, well, we know that she was living on a street called Rue 20 000, which is 11 Rue 20 000, because it was in Manet's diary, where next to her name was her apartment address as a reference. And I wanted her to walk as if she's walking to Manet's studio, ready for the session. So that's why she's wearing that dress. That's why she's wearing those earrings. So she's going to Manet's studio there. And in the background, you can see the gates of a park that she would be able to walk by on her way to Manet's studio. So that's why you have this grand park in the background and in the midst of rain.
Wow. Beautiful. All right. Well, let's move on to the next slide, next question. Does the inclusion of your work in Black American Portraits, an exhibition of over 200 years of portraits, change the way you see this piece, this one specifically of Biddy Mason? And do you see your work in conversation with any of the other artists in the show?
I would say it's, I'm happy she is included because I'm happy that she's has more significance in American history, really. Not only African American history, but in history. Because her role that was forgotten, I think now it's a bit better and people know more about her and her notoriety is getting bigger. But, if it was up to me, there would be, statues and books and movies about her, and TV show and everything. So I'm happy she's included because I think it matters for her legacy, and it matters for kids to be inspired to understand that it was the world was populated with that type of people who did not let the circumstance of their birth define who they were, and the tenacity and their patience and their applying skills really not only helped them, but really changed their destiny. So I think it's important for her to be included, but it's also make me very happy that there's a light shine on her.
Yes.
And I feel like the conversation, which is in the show actually, because in the show.
Yes, and I'll say for the people out there in the virtual audience, the scale's not quite exactly the way it is, but this is exactly the way the works are installed in the show in Black American Portraits. We have your Biddy Mason portrait bookending one wall, and then just to the right of that is this painting by Titus Kaphar.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought, to me, it's a great conversation just there, because in a way you see that they emulate that at the same time, and the idea of bondage and the idea of what's beyond the curtains. And this work is very powerful about, with Jefferson and the representation of Sally Hemings I mean, I assume it's Sally Hemings, but maybe somebody can read it differently. But and I just like this juxtaposition of what it meant to be in bondage and what these women had to do to really take themselves out of an awful situation. And they always had to be smart. And again, it's interesting because the story of Jefferson and Sally Hemings is always portrayed as, and there's a movie like this called Jefferson in Paris, as this, beautiful love story where, they had kids together and it was a beautiful thing. It was almost like a romantic comedy, but I don't think you can push that type of narrative when someone owns someone else, right? And when you own, and I think she was underage also at that time.
Yeah, much younger.
Right. So I don't, I mean, I like it was a very romantic idea. It's the idea of romanticizing what it meant at the time. But to me, it's really a conversation between these women who did the best with what they had in hand, with the cause that they were dealt with. They did what was the best for them and for their kids and for their legacy.
Right. I'm so glad you chose this piece too, because this idea of behind the myth of benevolence, the person was asking about portraiture being about wealthy white men for the most part, traditionally, especially when we think about portraits of founding fathers and the myth of this benevolent founding of this nation. And what has always been behind that, but hidden from view, is exactly what you said, these women who did their best under the circumstances of unimaginable oppression, And so what your work does, though, is if Titus Kaphar is revealing, taking the canon and tearing it back to show what's been there, you're also illuminating stories that have been kept out of view in a different way, bringing the beauty and the power of Black subjects to light who have not been celebrated traditionally.
I think I think we, even though our narratives are different, I think we actually talk about the same thing. By using the same visual language and by highlighting a part of history that sometimes we tend to ignore, whether he is definitely revealing and put in your face what really happened, and I shine the light on people, and certainly women who have been forgotten for everything they accomplished.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing in talking about not only this work, but there's another work in Black American portraits that is a augmented reality portrait of Biddy Mason. It includes some writing, some original watercolors and pictures, photographs from around the time she would have been in Los Angeles as really one of the pioneers of the city. So work by Biddy Mason a work by Ada Pinkston in honor of Biddy Mason called The Open Hand is Blessed. And in talking about both of these portraits of Biddy Mason, it's amazing how many Angelenos, people who were born and raised in Los Angeles, have never heard of this woman who once owned pretty much all of what is downtown Los Angeles, born into slavery and is, one of the founding mothers of the city. So it's really important work.
Yeah, it's definitely important to talk about her and make her known, and people must know who she was and what she gave back to their own city, that's for sure.
Right. Let's go to the last question and the next slide. And this question is, traditionally, portraits were commissioned by powerful people to represent their wealth and influence for posterity. What do you think is the function of portraits today?
Well, I think I talked a little bit about that earlier. Sorry, but yeah, it's the idea of mingling the spirit and the story, and not trying to emulate only the propaganda. Or I remember. When you're thinking about all those leaders, and I'm going to refer to European leaders because they were kings and all. And you have, I think it was the King of Spain that was actually represented by Goya many times. And he was he had a very fragile health. But the portraits you see of her of him, are essentially him on horses, being an equestrian, holding heavy swords or being proud and tall. And in real life, he was absolutely none of that. He couldn't even jump on a horse to save his life. So there was a lot of storytelling, but not necessarily, and certainly not telling the truth. That was not the goal. The goal was not about the truth. The goal is to present everybody on the best way. Queen Victoria was the same. At some point, she was incredibly popular, and they commissioned this portrait of her and her husband at the time and the three kids to convey the idea of family. Same with Marie Antoinette. Before the revolution, obviously, she was also incredibly popular. So they commissioned the idea that they commissioned portraits of her so people would like her. And so they only portrayed them in their best light. And I think right now you can still have to make portraits as markers of history. You have to include them in that narrative, but I think it's important to see the human side as well.
Thank you for that. There was a question from someone saying, Elizabeth, you were in great company at LACMA in the Black American Portraits exhibition. Can you tell us about some of the personal connections you have with other artists in the exhibition, or those you may not have met, but who have had a great influence on you? And of course, you have a lot of artists to choose from. In fact, I think there are over 100 artists represented in the show.
Well, there's two that are coming to mind right now. So I'm going to name Jordan Castille, who I met a few years ago because she used to be my studio neighbor. And I didn't know her at the time, and then we became fast friends because we were next to each other. And I was introduced to her work, which is so incredibly powerful and beautiful. And the way she is able to capture the human spirit, we were talking about exactly portraiture, and that you can capture the essence of a person. And she does that because also she's very generous, she's kind, and I think she's opening herself to really know the people and the people she is asking to be her sitters. And if she does not, she can grasp that moment of their humanity. And she has a very, very great skill is to be empathetic. I would say that's a personal connection to her. And also Barclay Hendricks, that very kindly somebody compared my work to his, and I was forever grateful for that, because of the idea of represent greatness into the Black body that he did, and you can see his body of work through all the decades he painted. It was different decades, and you can see the evolution, and it was unapologetic and beautiful at the same time.
Very much so. Those are some great ones. Some really great ones. There's a couple questions that I'd like to share with you, and I'll just put them together. what advice do you have for young Black artists? And how did art education help you develop your craft and your artistic career?
My main advice for artists in general, certainly Black artists, is to not wait to be inspired for doing your work. Working and practicing, nobody will push you but you. So the hardest part of doing work is to show up. And sometimes it's very difficult because you feel like you don't have the inspiration. Inspiration is a myth. There's no inspiration, people. You have to show up, and sometimes it's going to be painful. Whatever your practice is, whether you're a sculptor, musician, a painter, you're going to show up in front, and you won't want to do it. But you have to force yourself, because once you start, you won't be able to stop. But it's that moment, and that moment of starting can take 5 minutes. It can take you 4 hours. It does, but don't be discouraged and just show up and make a schedule of it if you must. Treat it as a job. Treat it as if you don't have the choice, really, because technically you don't. If you want to succeed as an artist, you don't have the choice. You just have to show up.
Mm.
So, yeah, what was the second part? I mean, that was very intense for a second.
Yeah. Well, just to respond to that, there's an essay by Octavia Butler called Positive Obsession. She didn't write many essays. She wrote a couple, and it's a very beautiful kind of extrapolation of what you're saying. This idea that people feel like to be a writer, it applies to not just art, but kind of anything that you want to pursue as a creative. Inspiration is your biggest enemy, because it may strike or it may not.
Exactly. It's definitely well said.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. The other question was about how art education has influenced your craft and your career.
It helps because it opens your mind to other techniques, other artists, pushes you to observe, to research, and to give you some sort of a discipline that you might not have. And I think that was a big influence. The technique is not so much what I learned in school, because you discover, you have to discover what you want to say, and I'm not sure school is the best for that, but they give you the tool for you to be able to discover who you are. So and that's helpful, because you can still do it by yourself. It's tougher, but you can still do it by yourself. As long as you're curious, which is your biggest gift, and you have the stamina to do enough research and to look at other works from other artists from all the times. We have a wealth in history of art, and I think you can dive into it and find your inspiration there.
Great. All right. I think that we have answered at least all of our questions. And I'm curious if there is anything else that's come up for you as we've spoken that you think is important for people to walk away with, hearing about your work or about portraiture in general.
I would say it's important that the portrayal of Black bodies is, more not unified, and more I would say normal. Not that it's become some sort of anomaly or a surprise. And hopefully we're going with that. I mean, obviously the show in LACMA was pivotal, hopefully, for that, to see that it spanned over hundreds of years, and to see that the presentation was there and still here today. So I'm hoping that this portrayal is an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
I was very honored to have been commissioned by institution called the Park Armory, where they wanted to commission a black body to inhabit this room where you only have a portrait of older white men, and to make this an intervention. So I hope there's definitely more institutions that will do something of that sort and make black portrayal part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is so important. It's impossible to underestimate what it does to your psyche, whoever you may be, to walk into a room and see lines of portraits of people who look exactly the same. That really, conveys a sense of power and an ideal identity, an ideal gaze. And so I think what Park Avenue Armory is asking you to do, and what hopefully more institutions are working toward, is exactly that, shifting the focus so that it is not unusual to see a portrait of a Black person, but that there are honest, beautiful, joyful, full portrayals of people that we can see. All right. I think that we are pretty much at time. So, Elizabeth, yeah, I think we've covered a lot of beautiful things here. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us today, and even more for your work every day. And thank you for taking some time out of your studio time to reflect.
Thank you so much. I was so happy to be part of the conversation. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Shout out to everyone who's looking at this program from the AUC and from Spelman, and have a wonderful day.